For me, the terror is relentless. I see things that aren't there, hear whispers in the darkness, and smell odors that no one else can detect. My mind becomes a battleground, where reality and illusion wage a ceaseless war for dominance. Even in the safety of my own home, I am haunted by the pervasive feeling that someone, or something, is watching me, waiting to strike when I least expect it. Living alone is out of the question. The mere thought of being isolated in a world of my own terrifying creations fills me with paralyzing fear. Even the company of my cats provides little solace, as my delusions convince me that danger lurks around every corner, just waiting to pounce. It's a constant battle to remind myself that these fears are unfounded, that the threats I perceive are nothing more than figments of my tortured imagination. Cameras are a particular source of dread for me, triggering memories of past traumas that still haunt me to this day. The mere sight of a lens sends shivers down my spine, evoking a primal fear that grips me with an iron fist. I know it's irrational, that the cameras are merely tools meant to capture moments in time, but try telling that to my overactive imagination. The trauma of my past experiences looms large in my mind, casting a long shadow over my present reality. My episodes, terrifying as they are, serve as grim reminders of the horrors I've endured and the demons I continue to battle. Each hallucination, each delusion, is a ghost from my past come back to torment me, a spectral reminder of the darkness that lurks within. And yet, despite the overwhelming fear that threatens to consume me, I soldier on. I take my medications faithfully, hoping against hope that they will offer some respite from the relentless onslaught of terror. Sometimes I even take them twice, just to be sure, a small act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But even as I cling to the thin thread of sanity, I can't shake the feeling that my future holds only more of the same. The specter of institutionalization looms large in my mind, a grim reminder of the fate that awaits me if I can't keep my demons at bay. It's a fate I've come to accept, resigned to the inevitability of my own descent into madness. In the meantime, I cling to the fragile sanctuary of my apartment, a fortress against the encroaching darkness that threatens to consume me. Every day is a battle, a struggle to keep the fear at bay and the demons at bay. But even in the darkest of nights, there is a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light that refuses to be extinguished. For now, I take refuge in the presence of my therapist, a beacon of hope in a world gone mad. Their office, conveniently located just a stone's throw from my apartment, offers a lifeline in the midst of the storm. It's a small comfort, to be sure, but in a world ruled by fear and uncertainty, even the smallest gestures of kindness can mean the difference between salvation and damnation. So I soldier on, one day at a time, clinging to the fragile threads of sanity in a world gone mad. I may be walking on eggshells, teetering on the brink of oblivion, but as long as there's still breath in my lungs and fire in my soul, I'll continue to fight, for myself, for my sanity, and for the faint glimmer of hope that refuses to be extinguished. When I was a kid, I used to have a voice in my head. His name was Jack, and he was everything I wasn't. As I sat on the therapist's couch, he'd pace the room and rip up papers. When I walked through the halls in high school, he'd whisper sweet nothings and insults in my ear. My therapist said he was part of the committee, the voices we have that govern our existence. The ones that say, "Kiss the boy," and the ones that say, "Step away, girl, that's enough." But if Jack was part of the committee, he'd be the kind of belligerent asshole that sits on city planning boards and vetoed low-income housing in favor of a parking lot. Jack was a jackass, I used to tell him. His name was fitting, we both agreed. For all of his jackassery and mean words, he was honest, and brutally so. The kind of honest that makes or breaks people. I considered myself one of the lucky ones. Who could tell him to fuck off? And that I wouldn't bend to his will and sweet nothings that said I was nothing. And eventually Jack was nothing. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss his musings. The constant rambling that filled my mind. And made me laugh in conferences and doctor's appointments alike, at blank walls and people. I wondered what they would think if they could hear Jack too. When I was young, I always said Jack was the monster that lived inside of me. But really, We call the voices that we don't like monsters because the alternative is to realize the voice is our own and that we are the monsters. But the other voices in my head got louder. And sometime, unknown to me, Jack slipped out of my head, just as easily as a man would slip out of bed before the sun came up. And when I opened my eyes, I saw nothing, but felt the emptiness in the bed next to me. I felt that emptiness for a long time. If someone's walked along the same path as you for long enough, you might not miss them, but you might miss the sound of their footsteps. And just like any relationship I've been in, healthy or not, I missed the sound of his feet, even though I wasn't so enamored with the man attached to those boots. Somewhere between the chronic sleep deprivation and anxiety I've been having lately, I got stuck in that place between sleep and consciousness. In that odd place, where flowers are gray and rabbits can talk, Jack came to me. He sat down next to me, where I had fallen asleep at my desk. Just as easily as he walked out of my life, he wandered in. As my eyes fluttered, he smiled and whispered, "Hey kid, how's it been?" I responded, "I miss you, Frankenstein." He laughed and replied, "You know Frankenstein was the doctor." I rolled my eyes. "And the doctor was the monster." He murmured his assent. And we are both." I couldn't argue with that. I offered up, "I'm not interested in dissecting things anymore." Jack scoffed. "As if. You just find new things to take apart." Before I could reply, he continued, "I just wanted to swing by, see how you're putting it all together." It was my turn to huff. "That might be the first nice thing you've said to me." I couldn't see him. I'm not that kind of crazy. But I knew he was smiling that light, weary smile. You needed to hear it. Few times were he and I ever wordless, and I just laid there a minute before responding. "I miss you. I missed having you by my side even though you were a jackass." "We were back to square one," he replied simply. "I know. You're lonely. The thing is, you only talked to me because I lived in your head and you did too." So this was one of his monologues. I waited for it to descend into a tirade. But he continued as gently and evenly as he ever did. "It's time to leave that head, kid. You have someone on the outside." And then he was gone, with no fanfare or arguments. Like he never was, because he always was in me, and he was me. I didn't put up a fuss because I knew, as always, he was honest to a fault. He was right, I had someone on the outside now. A ringing phone brought me back to the land of the living. On my pillow, wedged awkwardly atop my book pile, was my head with tears running down it. I opened my eyes, with the world still watery, and saw a green call button on the phone I placed next to my face. Was it morning? Was it night? I didn't know. All that mattered was that he called, and that he was going to walk beside me now. Jack was right. I didn't need him, I had someone else to whisper good, sweet things in my ear. It was a rare occasion for me to be back in my hometown, and my dear friend, a DJ, had invited me over one evening. The prospect of catching up with old friends and enjoying some great music was enticing, so I eagerly accepted his invitation. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere was electric. My friend was spinning tracks, and the room pulsated with energy as people danced and mingled. The night seemed full of promise, filled with laughter and camaraderie. However, as the hours passed and more people arrived, my sense of unease began to grow. I had indulged in a fair amount of drinks, and the music had faded into the background as a nagging feeling crept over me. It started with a subtle shift in the room's energy. The lights seemed to dim, and the music faded into a distant hum. Suddenly, I felt as though all eyes were on me, as if I were the center of attention in some elaborate charade. Rational thought abandoned me as paranoia took hold. I became convinced that the entire gathering was orchestrated to trap me, to ensnare me in some sinister plot. Every handshake, every glance, every word exchanged felt like part of an elaborate ruse, designed to lure me into a trap. I retreated to the safety of the sofa, my mind racing with irrational thoughts. I watched in horror as the scene played out before me. My friend's DJ set now a sinister backdrop to my escalating paranoia. It was then that my friend's girlfriend approached me, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine worry. I tried to brush off her concern, claiming fatigue, but the fear gnawed at me, refusing to be silenced. She ushered me to a spare bedroom, her comforting presence a small beacon of light in the darkness of my mind. Alone in the room, I paced the floor, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Hours passed in a blur as I lay on the bed, my mind consumed by irrational fears. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound, sent shivers down my spine as I waited for the inevitable. But the hours stretched on, and no one came. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I made my escape, slipping out of the house unnoticed. The world outside felt surreal, the daylight casting long shadows that seemed to mock my fears. It wasn't until later that day, in the harsh light of reality, that the true absurdity of my paranoia became clear. I laughed at the absurdity of it all, relieved to be free from the grip of fear that had held me captive for so long. But the memory lingered, a reminder of the fragility of the mind and the power of fear to distort reality. It was an experience I hoped never to repeat, a journey into the depths of my own psyche that left me shaken but wiser for the ordeal. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope, a light that shines through the shadows and guides us back to safety. The weirdest thing I've ever experienced was one morning when I walked from my bedroom to my living room, expecting the usual mundane routine of starting my day. However, what awaited me was far from ordinary. As I entered the living room, my eyes were immediately drawn to the ceiling, where a bizarre sight greeted me. Hanging from the rafters were strange, soft-looking tubes, resembling oversized earthworms. They swayed gently in an unseen breeze, their translucent surfaces glistening under the faint light filtering through the windows. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I blinked and rubbed them in disbelief, the tubes remained, undulating in a macabre dance. Each one seemed to pulse with a life of its own, emitting a faint, otherworldly glow that cast eerie shadows across the room. As I stood there, rooted to the spot, a pungent odor assaulted my senses, causing me to recoil in revulsion. It was a noxious blend of chemicals, sharp and acrid, like the stench of burning rubber mixed with rotten eggs. I gagged and covered my nose, desperate to escape the nauseating fumes that filled the air. But it wasn't just the smell that overwhelmed me. It was the realization that these tubes were leaking toxic gases, each one emitting a different noxious scent. It was as if they were conduits for some malevolent force, spreading their poison throughout the room with malicious intent. As panic began to rise within me, I knew I had to take action. I stumbled forward, weaving my way through the maze of tubes that littered the floor, their surfaces slick with a viscous fluid that oozed from within. With every step, I felt a sense of dread gnawing at my insides, as if I were trespassing in a realm where I did not belong. Finally reaching the safety of the couch, I collapsed onto its worn cushions, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, hoping to drown out the cacophony of my own thoughts with mindless chatter and noise. But even the familiar voices emanating from the screen offered little solace in the face of such surreal horror. As the hours dragged on, the hallucinations only grew more intense, more vivid. I found myself surrounded by a throng of shadowy figures, their forms shifting and morphing in the dim light. They whispered words of madness and despair, their voices a discordant symphony of anguish and torment. Desperate for respite, I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, hoping to find refuge within its walls. But even there, I could not escape the clutches of my own mind. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay, the walls closing in around me like the bars of a prison cell. I buried my head beneath the covers, seeking refuge from the horrors that lurked just beyond my sight. But no matter how tightly I squeezed my eyes shut, I could still sense their presence, looming over me like dark specters in the night. In that moment of desperation, I made a silent plea to the one person who had always been there for me, even in my darkest hours. I begged my neighbor from childhood, a kindly soul who had long since passed away, to intervene and put an end to this madness. And then, as if by some miracle, the hallucinations began to fade, their grip on my mind loosening with each passing moment. The tubes vanished, the noxious odors dissipated, and I was left alone in the silence of my room, shaken but alive. Looking back on that harrowing experience, I couldn't help but wonder what had triggered such a terrifying episode. Was it the stress of everyday life, weighing heavy on my fragile psyche? Or perhaps it was something more sinister, lurking in the depths of my subconscious, waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. Whatever the cause, one thing was certain: I would never forget the horrors that I had witnessed that day, nor the profound sense of relief that washed over me when they finally came to an end. And as I lay there in the darkness, surrounded by the comforting embrace of solitude, I made a solemn vow to cherish each moment of sanity that was granted to me, knowing that the thin veil separating reality from madness could be torn asunder at any moment. I am schizophrenic, and I think that some cases of schizophrenia are indeed paranormal experiences. In September of 2017 I became a born-again Christian and found faith in God. Soon after finding faith, I began thinking things that were contrary to the Bible. Then, in November of 2017 I started exhibiting symptoms of schizophrenia. It all started when I decided to forgive the devil. It was the worst mistake of my life. The moment I did it, I felt a cracking sensation and a pinprick of something penetrating my forehead. Then my ears began ringing louder than usual, and it was almost as if I could hear the sound of water running through the pipes. I would eventually learn that this is tinnitus, as the sound never went away, and it is now something that I must live with. It was at that moment, a demonic presence invaded my body and continues to be with me this day. I can feel goosebumps on my arms and legs, and I hear a thumping behind me, and I get the impression that it is looking over my shoulder. It just said, "You are correct, you've got my attention. What are you typing?" Just now, my chair just shook ever so slightly. It's a very minute vibration that I doubt anyone would be able to sense except me. Ever since then, I have been having strange experiences. First, I started getting delusions about being chosen by God as one of His 2 witnesses from Revelation, and I kept thinking that the apocalypse would happen soon. I would look at people wistfully, thinking that these were the last moments of the world and people were not even aware of it. I hear voices. For a while, they seemed to be my own thoughts of me thinking. I thought I was hearing my own voices. However, the thoughts became more and more dark. I first noticed this when I was at church. I was helping someone run electrical wire to one of the rooms, and while I was up in the attic, and the names Satan and Lucifer kept coming into my mind. I prayed to God for it to stop, but it just kept happening. I couldn't stop it, and I was getting freaked out by it. Why do I keep thinking the name of the devil? Why won't it stop? You don't know what it's like to not be able to control what you're thinking. It was terrifying. Then, one day, it revealed itself to me. Again, I am getting goosebumps on my arms and legs as I am typing this. I was laying on the couch, and I could feel something sit down next to me. Then I felt the camera of my vision shake as something laughed at me. I am feeling it push into the back of my chair as I am typing. It's literally pushing into the small of my back. I can feel a rolling sensation as it moves across my back and under my behind. Then it spoke. I can't remember exactly what it said to me, but it said that it was a devil and that it would be with me until the day that I died. Then, it would be there to drag me to hell. At first, it kept showing me images of a dark-haired guy in a forest sitting with a group of people around a campfire, but everyone was wearing clothes from the 70s and they had hairstyles from that time period as well. I wondered what this vision was, and it said that it was him, when he inhabited a guy named Ray Templeton. It said that it drove him to suicide. Just now, it is saying, "I'll do the same thing to you. You will kill yourself, Greg. You will give your soul to Satan." When I hear this, all I can do is reply, "Never! You and your kind will be defeated in the end." I also quote Bible scripture of Mark 8 verse 36. What good is it for someone to gain the world yet forfeit your soul? Even quoting Bible verses to it does not make it stop or go away. I think about James 4 verse 7. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. But this thing does not flee. I resist it over and over each day. You don't know how many times. I think it puts suggestions that appear to me as thoughts in my head about selling my soul, but I know that I am not the one thinking it. Then it tells me it was me. You will. I'll make you. It's happy that I am typing this and telling people about it. It just said, I like it. Using a clip from a Chevy Chase movie that I saw called Modern Problems that you can see here. I like it, Chevy Chase. It often uses clips from movies, songs, or even things that I have heard to draw from and play back to me in my mind to reinforce points that it is trying to make. It keeps on pushing into the back of my chair. It's funny, it didn't really mess with me like this all day until I just now started writing about my experience. I'm telling you, this is a demonic entity. It is blasphemous towards God and the Holy Spirit. It says things that no Christian would say. It even says the unpardonable sin and commits it in my mind. I cringe with fear every time it does it. Sometimes it taunts me and says that it was me doing it. Other times it will say, "What are you afraid of? You're not the one doing it." I reply, I still don't want to hear it. It's like a game to it. I swear this thing is like a small child. You would think that it would get tired of saying the same things to me over and over again. Yet, just like a child, it keeps doing it over and over. Personally, I think it's because it's not that intelligent. However, it has one advantage, is that it is able to read my mind and is always one step ahead of me. In the midst of a seemingly ordinary night at my father's house in California, the tranquility of the moment shattered when I encountered a horrifying transformation unfolding in the reflection of the bathroom mirror. As I went about my nightly routine, the mundane act of brushing my teeth took a sinister turn when I noticed strange, wiry hairs sprouting from the back of my hands. Shock quickly turned to horror as I witnessed the rapid proliferation of these grotesque hairs across my face, accompanied by the unsettling sight of my canine teeth elongating into sharp points. Panic seized me as I splashed water onto my face in a desperate attempt to banish the nightmarish vision, but to no avail. The grotesque changes persisted, sending waves of terror coursing through my veins. Frantically, I fled to the sanctuary of my shared bedroom, seeking solace and reassurance from my older sister, Camille. However, my sister's initial response was far from comforting, her harsh words failing to acknowledge the gravity of my distress. As I trembled in fear, struggling to articulate the horrors I had witnessed, her indifference only served to compound my terror. The surreal nightmare continued to unfold as my surroundings warped into a twisted semblance of reality, with even the innocent carpet morphing into a writhing mass of spiders. Trapped in a nightmarish world of my own making, the simplest of tasks became insurmountable challenges. The urgency of my need to relieve myself clashed with the paralyzing fear that gripped me, leaving me trapped in a state of helpless despair. It was only when my fear reached its zenith, culminating in a humiliating accident, that my sister was jolted into action. Recognizing the severity of my distress, she took charge, summoning our father and pleading for his intervention. Despite his initial dismissal, her persistence eventually compelled him to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. Through the haze of fear and confusion, I found myself enveloped in my sister's embrace, her rare display of compassion offering a fleeting respite from the horrors that plagued me. As the night wore on and the hallucinations gradually subsided, a heavy silence descended upon the household, broken only by the occasional murmurs of concern exchanged between family members. The dawn brought with it a tentative sense of relief, but the scars left by the night's events ran deep, casting a shadow of uncertainty over my future. In the aftermath of the harrowing ordeal, I found myself grappling with a newfound sense of isolation and despair. The once familiar contours of my reality had been irrevocably altered, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The specter of mental illness loomed large, casting a pall over my every thought and action. Months passed, but the trauma of that fateful night lingered, festering beneath the surface like a wound that refused to heal. With each passing day, the weight of my burden grew heavier, threatening to consume me entirely. The pervasive sense of dread and despair became my constant companions, shadowing my every move and poisoning my thoughts. Then, just when I thought the worst was behind me, fate dealt me another cruel blow. As the first trimester of my pregnancy drew to a close, I found myself ensnared in yet another nightmarish episode of hallucinations and delusions. The fear and uncertainty that had once plagued me returned with a vengeance, casting a dark shadow over the joyous anticipation of impending motherhood. In the cold, sterile confines of a hospital ward, I grappled with the terrifying specter of mental illness once more. The whispered diagnosis of schizophrenia sent shockwaves through my already fragile psyche, shattering whatever semblance of stability remained. Trapped in a nightmarish labyrinth of my own making, I struggled to make sense of the horrors that besieged me. Through it all, my sister remained a steadfast anchor, her unwavering support offering a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times. Together, we weathered the storm, confronting the demons that lurked within and emerging stronger for the battle. Though the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, I refused to succumb to despair, clinging to the belief that redemption lay on the distant horizon. As the years passed and the scars of my ordeal began to fade, I found solace in the knowledge that I was not alone. Surrounded by the love and support of my family and friends, I embarked on a journey of healing and self-discovery, determined to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. Though the specter of mental illness continued to cast its long shadow, I faced the future with courage and resilience, knowing that no matter what horrors awaited me, I would face them head-on, armed with nothing but the strength of my indomitable spirit. For 5 long years I had been grappling with what I now recognize as prodromal symptoms of a mental illness. At the time, I didn't understand what was happening to me. I was plagued by persistent doubts and insecurities, convinced that people were talking about me behind my back, spreading rumors about my sexuality or perceived oddness. My struggles with social interaction only exacerbated my sense of alienation and self-doubt. In an attempt to regain control over my life, I threw myself into the world of personal development and self-help. I became a self-help junkie, devouring books on positive thinking, meditation, and self-improvement. I spent hours at the gym, sculpting my body in a desperate bid to boost my self-esteem. Each morning, I embarked on elaborate rituals designed to set a positive tone for the day ahead, hoping to banish the relentless anxiety that dogged my every step. Despite my best efforts, however, the specter of anxiety loomed over me like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over even the most mundane aspects of my life. I was consumed by anger and resentment toward my parents, blaming them for the perceived inadequacies and shortcomings that plagued me. In my mind, they were responsible for my struggles, and I harbored a deep-seated belief that I was somehow defective because of them. Then, one fateful evening, everything changed. I returned home from work, exhausted and weary from yet another day spent battling my inner demons. But instead of diving headfirst into my usual routine of self-improvement, something shifted within me. For the first time in 5 years, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard voices drifting through the walls of my apartment. At first, I dismissed them as the usual background noise of city living. But as the voices grew louder and more insistent, a creeping sense of unease wormed its way into my consciousness. I strained to make out the words, my heart pounding in my chest as a chill swept down my spine. The voices seemed to be discussing me, dissecting my life and my perceived shortcomings with a cruel and relentless precision. They mocked my efforts to find happiness and fulfillment, taunting me with my failures and insecurities. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my innermost thoughts and fears were being laid bare for all to see. In a panic, I stumbled out of bed and into the night, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of paranoia that threatened to consume me. I wandered the deserted streets, my mind racing with irrational thoughts and fears. I felt as though I were being watched, stalked by unseen forces that sought to destroy me from within. When I returned home in the early hours of the morning, the voices followed me, whispering taunts and accusations that echoed in the recesses of my mind. I felt trapped, cornered by enemies I could neither see nor touch. My world had become a prison of my own making, and I saw no way out. As the days turned into weeks, my mental state continued to deteriorate. The voices grew louder and more aggressive, their words like knives that sliced through my fragile psyche. I became convinced that my neighbors were conspiring against me, plotting to expose me as a fraud and a failure. I lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack would come or where it would strike. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. The relentless onslaught of paranoia and delusion became too much to bear, and I found myself teetering on the brink of madness. In a desperate bid to silence the voices once and for all, I sought refuge in the cold, sterile confines of a mental hospital, hoping to find solace and sanctuary within its walls. For 2 long months, I languished in that lonely place, surrounded by others who shared my pain and my torment. It was a time of reckoning, a period of introspection and self-discovery that forced me to confront the demons that lurked within. I underwent therapy and medication adjustments, struggling to regain control over my fractured mind. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to claw my way back from the brink of despair. With the help of compassionate doctors and supportive friends and family, I learned to manage my symptoms and cope with the challenges of living with a mental illness. I embraced mindfulness and meditation, finding solace in the quiet depths of my own mind. Today, I am grateful for the journey that brought me to this place of healing and acceptance. I no longer live in fear of the voices that once tormented me, nor do I harbor resentment toward those who could not understand the turmoil raging within me. Instead, I am filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the strength and resilience that carried me through the darkest days of my life. While the scars of my past may never fully heal, they serve as a reminder of the depths of my own inner strength and the power of hope to triumph over despair. I was married to a man who became schizophrenic when our daughter was about 3 years old, and his episodes grew increasingly distressing over time. At first, it was manageable, the occasional paranoid outburst or delusion, but as the years passed, his condition worsened, plunging our family into a nightmare we never imagined. Doctors assured us that schizophrenia, while serious, could be managed with medication, likening it to treating a chronic illness like diabetes. All he needed to do, they said, was take his medication faithfully, and he would lead a relatively normal life. But for my husband, the medication came with its own torment. He claimed it made him feel numb, disconnected from reality, and unable to experience genuine emotions. So every night, when he thought I wasn't looking, he would surreptitiously spit out his pills, and that's when the real horrors would begin. One particularly terrifying night stands out in my memory. It was 2:48 a.m. when I felt a tap on my shoulder, jolting me awake. My husband's voice, tinged with panic, whispered in the darkness, "I see beasts, 3 of them, and they're all standing around our bed." My heart hammered in my chest as I turned on the lights, scanning the room for any sign of the creatures he described. I rose from bed, my mind racing with fear, and checked on our daughter, relieved to find her sleeping peacefully, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. Returning to the bedroom, I found my husband huddled under the covers, his eyes wide with terror as he repeated, No, I didn't. Tears streamed down his face, and I felt a surge of fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. In that moment, I wasn't sure if my daughter and I were safe around him, and I didn't know what to do. Frantic and desperate for help, I called the advice nurse, hoping for guidance in this nightmare. They fumbled with suggestions, attempting to reach someone from the psychiatric department to no avail. Eventually, they advised me to bring him to the psychiatric department in the morning, leaving me feeling utterly alone and terrified. The next morning, my husband left the house, claiming he was going downtown to grab breakfast. Hours passed, and when he returned, he claimed his car had been stolen, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke. Later, I discovered he had parked the car in a back alley, a sign of his increasingly erratic behavior. Despite my mounting concerns, we proceeded to his doctor's appointment, where the medical staff deemed him despondent but essentially okay, a diagnosis that offered little comfort in the face of his escalating instability. We returned home, the tension thick in the air, as I grappled with the growing realization that our lives were spiraling out of control. The following morning brought unimaginable horror. I awoke to find my husband in the bathroom, a steak knife clutched in his trembling hand. Blood dripped from his wrists, and terror seized my heart as I realized what he had done. In a frantic bid to escape the torment of his hallucinations, he had attempted to gouge out his own eyes. Rushing him to the emergency room, I prayed for a miracle, for some semblance of salvation in this nightmare. The doctors worked tirelessly to save his eyesight, but the damage had been done. The retina of his right eye had detached irreparably, leaving him blind in one eye, while the left eye miraculously remained intact. As I sat by his bedside, my heart heavy with grief and despair, my mother arrived, her face a mask of anguish as she pleaded with me to leave him, to protect myself and our daughter from further harm. Her words cut through me like a knife, but I remained steadfast, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, we would find a way through this darkness together. Weeks passed, and my husband was transferred to a locked psychiatric unit, his fragile mind a battleground of torment and anguish. During one of my visits, I mustered the courage to ask him why he had done it, why he had inflicted such unspeakable pain upon himself. His response chilled me to the bone. "The beast," he whispered hoarsely, his voice a mere shadow of its former self. "They were still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting to consume me. I had to do it, had to blind myself, to escape their malevolent gaze." In that moment, I realized the depth of his suffering, the relentless torment of his fractured mind. And as I stood there, gazing into the vacant depths of his eyes, I knew that our journey was far from over, that the shadows of his illness would continue to haunt us, casting their long, dark shadow over our lives. But despite the horror and the heartache, I clung to a sliver of hope, a flicker of light amidst the encroaching darkness. For love, I discovered, is a force more powerful than fear, more enduring than despair. And though the road ahead may be fraught with peril and uncertainty, I will walk it hand in hand with the man I love, determined to find redemption in the face of adversity, and to forge a future illuminated by the promise of hope. I had never experienced hallucinations until I moved into my very old house. It was a quaint yet eerie place, with its creaking floors and dimly lit corners. From the moment I stepped foot inside, I felt a sense of unease creeping over me. To make matters worse, I've always had an irrational fear of spiders, and it seemed this house was infested with them. They lurked in the shadows, weaving their intricate webs in every corner of the ceiling, their presence a constant reminder of my phobia. But it wasn't just the spiders that haunted me in that house. I had been on antidepressants for over 5 years, battling the demons of my own mind since birth. The medication helped keep my anxiety and depression at bay, but it couldn't protect me from the strange occurrences that began to unfold within those walls. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. I would come home from a long day of work, exhausted and weary, and collapse onto my bed, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. But as I drifted off into slumber, strange visions would dance before my eyes. I would wake to find bizarre contraptions hanging from the ceiling above me, like something out of a twisted nightmare. Belts and chains dangled ominously, their purpose unknown and unsettling. My heart would race, and a cold sweat would coat my skin as I scrambled out of bed, desperate to escape the surreal scene unfolding before me. As if the strange devices weren't enough, I made another unsettling discovery in that house a year prior. While tearing up the old, layered carpet in the front room, I stumbled upon a hidden stash of porn magazines tucked away beneath the floorboards. What struck me as odd was not the content of the magazines themselves, but rather the fact that they were clearly geared towards a gay audience, a revelation that seemed out of place in the conservative neighborhood where I lived. The carpet removal revealed more than just hidden secrets. It also exposed the layers of neglect that had accumulated over the years. Dust and debris clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the musty scent of decay. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as I gazed around the room, wondering what other secrets lay hidden within those walls. But it was the spiders that truly plagued me in that house. They seemed to be everywhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce at the slightest provocation. I would often find myself face to face with these 8-legged creatures, their hairy bodies glistening in the dim light, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the hallucinations only grew more frequent and more bizarre. I would wake to find myself surrounded by a swarm of spiders, their tiny legs skittering across my skin as they whispered incomprehensible secrets into my ear. I would scream and thrash, trying in vain to rid myself of their sinister presence, but they clung to me like a dark shadow, their venomous whispers echoing in the recesses of my mind. It wasn't until I made a drastic decision to stop taking my antidepressants that the hallucinations finally ceased. With each passing day, the spiders grew fewer in number, their once omnipresent presence fading into memory. And as I stood in that empty house, surrounded by the echoes of my own madness, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been real, or if it had simply been a trick of my troubled mind. But one thing was certain. I would never forget the horrors that had unfolded within those walls, or the nightmares that had haunted me in the dead of night. And as I walked away from that house for the final time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief washing over me, knowing that I would never again have to face the demons that lurked within. Hey there! I'm new but putting my all into sharing real horror stories. Your support is my motivation. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your comments mean the world to me. Let's make this journey together.